Welcome to What's Your Signal, the podcast exploring the latest trends in enterprise technology, network security, and how we connect people, places, and things. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Steffen. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. So our listeners might not realize this, but neither of us work in the office full-time, and we obviously are not the only ones. Many employees work remotely or in some kind of hybrid model where they only come into the office occasionally, like we do to record this. Here are a few stats that I found recently that stood out to me about remote work. By 2025, 32.6 million Americans will work remotely, so that's about a quarter of the workforce. 98% of workers want to work remote at least some of the time, which I don't blame them. 16% of companies operate fully remote without any physical office. And in 2024, computer and IT were the top industries for remote workers. So while remote is more common than ever, it really comes with risks. In fact, another stat I saw was that 73% of executives believe that remote workers pose a great security risk to their business. And that's a little bit of what we're going to get into today.
Yeah, I know. I think thinking about, prior to the pandemic, I could never have seen myself as a remote worker, right? I'd only ever known going to a physical location to work, whether it was when I worked for in my previous job for the state of Idaho or when I came to Cradle Point. I only ever worked at a location. And then when the pandemic forced everybody to, work from home, it became a revelation to people that they were able to operate effectively from home, whether that was having a dedicated workspace or figuring out how to do that at home. And so I think it became very clear to people that work became a thing you do and not a place you go, right? And so, I think that kind of changed the mentality of the worker that, unless there is something that I physically need to be present for, a team collaborative meeting or need access to a specific resource that you can only get access to on site. And I'm not talking about like a networked resource, right? We produce hardware here at Cradle Point. So we have certain hardware testing capabilities that you can only do on site, that you didn't need to go to an office. Now, I think fully remote does have its challenges. So hybrid is definitely the way to go, but having either a fully remote or a hybrid workforce is challenging for the IT team, because not only do you have to still maintain that traditional network for the office, because people are still going to utilize that as a co-working space or a collaboration space, but then have to extend that to potentially workers that you weren't intending to be remote, right? Because you always especially here in business where you're servicing other customers, you typically have a remote sales force that, refer to as road warriors, that they have their own needs as well. But then you have those more traditional that are going to sit at a desk. They have their needs as well. And having to extend your network and security capabilities to them is something that, IT teams didn't plan for and still struggle with, even 4 years removed from having to send everybody home, on how to ensure everything stays connected and secure.
Yeah. And today we have two guests here to help us better understand how to protect data and networks in the empty office area. So like you were saying, how do we keep all that stuff safe when people aren't here? Joining us from Ericsson remotely, we welcome Network and Infrastructure IT Manager Kory Harker and Lead Product Manager Daniel Scarberry. So I think we can all agree that remote work really solidified its place in enterprise business during the pandemic. What do you remember from that time? Kory, let's start with you.
Well, I remember it was chaos. Everything happened so quickly. We had to make a change on a dime. I remember speaking to a group of sales folks about the potential for working from home. And then the next day, everybody worked from home.
I think for me, I've always been on the product or solutions engineering, solutions architecture side. And so remote work was always a niche area, not a niche area, but it was for a certain type of company that was already moving to the cloud, was cloud first. I'm also in the Bay Area in San Francisco, so it's much more startups were there. So it wasn't as much of an issue, other than when it hit, the risk to every company is like, will we survive tomorrow? How do we have dollars tomorrow? And then do we have the dollars to change on a dime that technology, kind of like what Kory was saying, is like, yeah, there's this technology that's out there. We've heard about it. Could we even afford to make that dime without knowing if our business was going to exist? So I bought a new bicycle and I was like, well, if it doesn't exist, I'm going to go ride my bike for a month. But that was really, to me, I think it was like a business risk. Like, do we survive this as a business, not like as a person?
Yeah, and among the trepidation of those risks, did you guys hear any like actual horror stories of what happened when companies were transitioning to remote work?
I'll go first on this one because Kory's more on the implementation side. But for us, I worked in the cloud security broker space, right? So there were these companies that were already protecting cloud applications and their data in the cloud, but there was a subset was all VPNs. And so what I saw, so being on the product side, was these VPN deals would start to show up. And it was in onesie, twosies where people saw, they already knew this secure access service edge technology was kind of coming out, a zero trust. And so we had those ones and twos, and then a flood. It was just an instant flood of everyone's VPNs essentially didn't scale. They didn't work. And so their usual sales force was already on a VPN. It was on a VPN backhaul, and it was only for the sales team that was always out remote, was never coming in the office. And then overnight, it was just like, whoa, this is the new product space. It's an entire remote workforce. So that was my flood, literally almost overnight.
And from a security and productivity perspective, that's a huge impact. Kory, can you touch a little bit on that?
It's definitely huge. Productivity, at first, a lot of people told me it went up. They were like, I love working from home. My productivity is increasing dramatically. But over time, we started to recognize that a lot of the ad hoc problem solving and the in-person discussions were not happening. So that was kind of a concern. But from a security standpoint, you really had to look at where people were connecting from and how they were connecting and how we secured those connections. That was a really big risk for us.
And I imagine as companies are kind of looking at, so they're in this situation, right? The shift that's overnight. So they're put into a position where they sort of have to have a ready, fire, aim approach. And what's the results of that kind of approach to security?
Well, from a security aspect, you're left picking up the pieces, if you will. There are holes that you didn't notice because you couldn't prepare for those holes. You find gaps that you've got to fill. And Daniel experienced this when he looked at our current setup. He recognized that we didn't set up the way that we currently deployed in the best secure way. So we have some open connectivity to resources. And so Daniel is helping us back that out now, even 2 years later.
Wow.
I might add to this is I'm a product manager. I sort of live on the edge, right? Try to take this call as I jump off a ferry on a commute to the RSA conference. And I get to see kind of like where things are breaking, kind of push the boundaries, see where the security risks are, how do you take that to a customer? And so on that piece, it's sort of like the ready, aim, fires. You have to move. You have to do something is better than nothing. Otherwise, you learn nothing. And I saw it before, the big move over to secure access service edge type technologies is people were just frozen in indecision. So they never got to experience that learning phase. Kory took the move, made some mistakes, but his mistakes still just put him back where VPNs were. He actually still made a forward progress. And even if it's to 10 users or 20 users, that's progress that you get to learn from. And so, maybe I'm a bigger risk taker because I like that innovation. I think you can learn a lot by just, take a shot. Take a shot, learn something from that shot. Don't apply it maybe to the whole business, but take a shot on some small, low risk users or even the highest risk user, right? Do it to the leadership because they have to steer the business. And sometimes that means taking that risk.
Absolutely. So some of the things that we've, chatted about up to this point are anecdotal, but I'd like to hear maybe more categorically, what are the biggest IT management and network security challenges of remote work? Kory, let's start with you.
Well, securing cloud applications, data, and how individuals connect to those applications and then corporate data is one of the biggest security risks. And one of the best solutions for that is cloud architecture and cloud-based solutions that provide that security. They can provide a robust amount of solutions, like an approach for a multiple layers in an onion, and you can be provided that right out of the box, as opposed to slowly building up your security measures over time. So you really can mitigate a lot of those issues that you didn't understand right as you went down that ready, fire, aim approach. You can clean that up with the technologies out there available right now with cloud-based solutions. So
I'll add is, to me, it's that visibility. So if in the past you had a VPN backhaul, that's how you were getting visibility into a very small subset of users or small subset of use cases. But when you have a remote workforce, the full remote workforce, or the opportunity for any of your workforce to be remote, how do you get the same security stack applied in visibility? So that means secure web gateway. How do you enforce your acceptable use policies? How do you gain invisibility into your data loss protection? If that data is moving out of the business, you have no visibility into it. And that's just like an incredible challenge when everybody's remote and you can't just focus on 10 people anymore. It's the whole business. And where is your data going? And what are people doing day to day? And not from like, what are you doing over there, Daniel? But more of just, hey, where's the data going? Where are you committing that code to? Is it securely being committed? Are you sharing passwords? Are your kids coming up and using your PC after you? It's just, there's so many little things.
So Daniel, I want to expand on something that you said, and Kory, something that you touched on earlier, right? Is like, very shortly after everybody was sent home to work remotely, like it was very clear that individuals and employees were really embracing work, especially those that hadn't traditionally had the opportunity to remote work, right? In the intro, I talked about how prior to the pandemic, I only ever worked from a location and couldn't imagine being a remote worker. Now I can't imagine going back to an office full time. So how do you balance the needs of securing that data like Daniel talked about, while still giving the employees the flexibility and the ability to work anywhere they want and how they want and on the devices that they want to meet them? Because I think it's very clear that bad morale decreases productivity, right? If your employees aren't able to, be happy and fulfilled in their job or able to work in the way that makes them the most efficient, that can, reduce your productivity. But you still have to balance that with the needs of the securing their data. So how do you ensure that kind of balance? Because I think one of the things that I noticed, and I'll just tell a quick story before I turn it over to you, Kory, for the answer, is I remember early in, later stages in the pandemic, right after we'd been working from home for a little while, I happened to be getting new tires on my car, took my work laptop with me so that I could just connect to the Wi-Fi there in the lobby of the tire place and work while I was waiting for my car. And within 5 minutes of connecting to the Wi-Fi, I got a message from our security team. Hey, Mauricio, do you happen to be sitting in Les Schwab in your town and have your computer connected to that Wi-Fi? I'm like, yes, I do. And so, it's mentioning how you pivot and change, that was just, as an employee, that struck me like, oh, now we're able to, now we're really taking control of that. So how do you balance those needs, Kory, as far as what employees do? And, keep in mind that I am one of those employees that use service. So I'd definitely like to hear how we're balancing those things.
Definitely. One of the things that Daniel mentioned is the secure access service edge. That really has helped us, right? Because we can push the security closer to the end user. Rather than traditionally, you'd have everyone in the office behind a firewall, and you had a lot of the technologies for security based on your firewall, and everything was collectively inside of a building. Now you have people everywhere globally. And so with a secure access service edge, you're able to assign policies to people no matter where they are, no matter what network they connect to. And that extends to the visibility that Daniel was talking about earlier. And what you were talking about, Mauricio, when we noticed that you were connected to the Les Schwab Wi-Fi, it's that visibility and monitoring. We can see where you're connected and how you're connected and ensure that you are connected securely. So those are the ways. It's really been growth over time. We didn't implement one specific thing that had all the features and functionality, so we had visibility and monitoring. our tool that we use now, the Secure Access Service Edge, that's grown with visibility and options. And right now, if we were to have to make that switch now, we would be in a lot better position because of the functionality we have in the product.
Daniel, is there anything that you might add to that anecdote that Mauricio shared?
I think Kory covered it pretty good. I think I'll back it up from the business side, which is like lifestyle's pretty important. And I think that like that self-awareness of knowing like your employees, those are key performance indicators that you need to track. Really let them work. Just let them work and execute the business goals. It's not a management problem to say, why is Daniel working at the coffee table, right? Who cares, right? Like get his work done. And then secure the data that he's doing. And through this, I'm a religion of secure access services. Like that's the solution. And what you see with Mauricio was early on in these technologies, we've got alerts when Mauricio is in a new suspicious location. At this point in time, it's automation. Now it's automating. Was Mauricio actually a risk while he was getting his tires changed? Was it actually a risk when Daniel was working at some destination resort? Was he a risk? No. We already had the security controls around it. The security stack was still being applied just like he was on-prem. So the risk wasn't increased, and we can automate that based, contextual accesses. What is Mauricio accessing while at Le Schwab? What is Daniel accessing while at the Ferry Building? And does it fit his access needs at that time of day, doing the job he's doing? And that's where we're maturing to, right? The automation side versus actually reaching out to those employees until that alert reaches those thresholds. So see the maturing of that market every day.
We've talked a little bit about, in a nutshell, letting employees work the way that they want to work and where they want to work. And in some of those cases at different companies, that means using personal devices versus a company-provided device. Do the security tactics that are applied to remote work change when personal devices are introduced to the network? And if so, how?
Bringing in personal devices adds a lot of risk. Daniel mentioned this earlier. When you have a device at home, you're not sure if your kids are going to touch your device, right? You're not sure. I have an anecdote I can bring up where when we first started remote work, one of our head our controller, right? One of our higher up financial officers had his cell phone sitting out, and his little kid picked it up and put the wrong code in 3 or 4 times and wiped his whole device. And so, those are concerns. We don't want to have your data get lost, but we also want to secure your data at the same time. So I like to go back to being flexible, but understanding the requirements of the organization. We want to make sure that the employee has what they need to do their job, but we also need to ensure that they're secure while they're doing their job, and we can be flexible. So it's kind of this weird balancing act that you play.
Yeah, I'll add is you can't say no. If you say no, you're slowing down the speed of your business. Why would you slow down your business's ability to execute? Hey, Daniel's got a phone. Let's figure out how to let him join meetings from his phone. I probably take 30 to 40% of my workday just off my mobile phone. And that's not just on a phone call. That's doing video. That's doing chats like this. That's actually looking and reviewing requirements. Now, securing that data ends up being the same exact technology. It's the same technology on a different platform, right? You're still applying Secure Access Service Edge. You're still getting visibility through that. Your just deployment method ends up being, hey, I don't need to register and own that mobile phone. I'm just going to have my users add something like a client on that. So when they want to access, they'll go through a portal. So you can do these clientless access methods, remote browser isolation. The technologies all exist. They're all packaged in Secure Access Service Edge. The solution's there. It's adoption. So it's going back to you'll start to see these rolled out in small pods of users. And before you know it, it becomes more and more welcoming. And we think, what's the problem with BIOD? I don't understand the problem with BIOD. I figured out the security mitigation techniques that I didn't know 5 years ago, or I knew about them, but I wasn't comfortable. So we have to gain that comfort level across the organization that, hey, that's actually not as big of a risk as we thought, because we're able to apply the exact security controls on the iPads and the mobile phones as we do on the laptops. Also, I'm always in trouble because my devices are never up to posture level, or, I'm always on BYOD. So I am the bad guy. And that's my job, I guess. Maybe that's my job to figure that out.
how does this look from an employee perspective? Like, I remember 10 plus years ago I worked at AT&T a long time ago, and I remember coming on as an employee, and I would say, I want to use my iPhone to check my email or whatever, and I'd have to download Mobile Iron, and I'd have to sign like a handbook this thick that said, if you lose your phone, we're wiping everything on there, including all of your pictures of for the last 10 years. And it was kind of like this scary thing, and it was also very slow. And so today, when we talk about like BYOD and remote work and employees using their own devices, are those current solutions, those isolation-based solutions, like you mentioned, RBI, what does that look like from the employee perspective? Is it still as cumbersome?
It's a completely abstracted layer to the end user anymore. There are so many different settings in isolation technology. There's clientless isolation, there's inline isolation, and you can stream pixels, and it's really up to the customer sensitivity level and the data sensitivity level of what are they accessing, and having that contextual access, say, like, how tight do we need to tighten these screws to the point where it affects the user experience? And these days, that user experience is absolutely nil. The user has no idea they're going through isolation technology. They have no idea DLP policies are being applied. It's all single pass architecture for scanning. You're not encrypting, unencrypting, re-encrypting, unencrypting, and handing off to all these integrated partners. It's a unified stack of all of those security services from a single vendor. But I do remember those old days of the thick handbook and the wiping. Yeah.
I think, it's funny you bring that up, Taylor, too, because I think that's the other balance, right? Is like, yes, I want to be able to use my personal mobile phone to check my email and take phone calls. But sorry, Kory, I don't trust the company with my personal data, right? I don't want them being able to erase my photos and erase my videos and see my social media and see my text messages, right? And so I think it is that while not slowing down the business, like Daniel said, right, it's also balancing the needs for the employees' privacy, right? Everybody wants to be efficient. Everybody, for the most part, especially now in this kind of remote or hybrid work environment, they want to be able to have that balance and be able to unify their schedules together to see when I have to do work activities and when I'm available for home activities and how I can schedule around those things. But they want to do it in a way where they're both, one, protecting the business assets, but protecting their own assets as well. So, I think that the evolution of tools, because I do remember as well having to sign that thick employee handbook or get that pop-up message on the phone where it's like, hey, if you want to access work stuff, we're going to take full control over your device. And you're like, you know what? I would rather carry a second phone. So
I'm taking notes on a quick feature. Is one of those was a privacy concern for mobile phones. People want to exit and quit, and they don't want this thing running in the background. So, and I've been working on the requirements. So thank you.
And I'll just say anecdotally, it used to be really difficult to enroll, like you guys are talking about. You'd have to download Mobile Iron. There'd be a whole enrollment process. But now device enrollment is so much easier, and we can do posturing on the device to verify that it will meet your policies. And if it doesn't meet policies, it's quick to mitigate the posturing issues. So it's been a lot different these days, enrolling different devices and securing devices. It's so much easier. And like Mauricio said, you don't trust the company with your data. So one of the things that we do is we only isolate the corporate data. So we're not even touching any other data. It's only corporate data. So that's a really big benefit these days.
Kory, there's a great real world thing happening right now is your rollout of all of these new laptops you shipped out to the employees with a barcode that they scan upon arrival. And that's their onboarding process. It has the instructions to download this. It's like a free, it's amazing. That was a really cool process that you guys implemented in what feels like overnight. Like you guys really got pushed to do that, and it's pretty cool.
Are there other ways in addition to like Secure Access Service Edge? Are there other things that companies should be doing to secure their networks, especially for remote employees? Like, is it best for them to provide the routers that their employees are going to be using, or is that kind of stuff even necessary?
That's a really good question. And I think it's funny that you bring that up. Originally, when the pandemic happened, and this goes back to our original conversation of when we first started, what did we do? We shipped hardware to employees. We shipped a router to employees' houses to secure their home network and to ensure that they were only connecting to Cradlepoint's network, or to ensure that they were only connected to corporate network. Now, we've advanced the technology quite a bit to where you could install just a piece of software on your device, so you don't have to have the hardware component. So my suggestion is to save money, mitigate the worry of asset management and recovery of those assets if an employee leaves. Use the software-defined method. That is much easier to deploy. It's an advanced technology, and as Daniel mentioned before, a lot of the security is baked in. It's already integrated, and they're constantly integrating and iterating, and changing the software and making it better.
There's some fascinating use cases that hardware, whether you're going to push routers out to people, could be solved. And you start to think of the future as, like Kory said, just put software on your standard Daniel, right? He moves too much. If you give him a router, what am I going to do? Or am I really going to carry this on the
He's
ferry?
on that
I just
bike
took over?
that he bought during the pandemic. We can't.
Yeah. It's like it doesn't solve my use case. There are some fascinating 5G use cases that if you have a primary cellular router or a failover router, and that's your home situation. I have Tesla Powerwalls. This is amazing. So I live in California. We have power outages every other week, especially where I live in a high fire zone, a high fire danger, flood zones. Power goes out. Well, now I have Powerwalls that will let me go for 7 days, but the internet will drop, right? So then you go into cellular. These cellular towers all have multi-day backups. So here I am. Nobody knows my power is out for multiple days. I go to work every day. There's just really no issue. The coffee shops are all down. The restaurants are down. The grocery stores are closed. But I'm able to do all my work and connect. It's fascinating. You could start to prioritize certain 5G slices in the future. You can run SD-WAN. So if Daniel's on a meeting and he really needs to prioritize that over his kids playing Minecraft or whatever the game's going to be of that decade, it's amazing some of these use cases that you can start to unlock with work from home routers or branch routers, things of that nature. So it's really use case dependent and solution dependent on where you're going to go. But I see some really cool sides of both of that.
Or some downsides if you would rather not have to work when the power goes out, I guess, depending on how you look at it.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely get a plane flight to some new destination for holiday and use their internet.
I do want to ask about, we've talked about the Secure Access Service Edge, how it's made that, SASE has made that easier for the enterprise and for the employees. And then Daniel, you've mentioned a lot of these isolation-based solutions, whether it's RBI and so on and so forth. Do companies need to implement all of these things to have a secure environment for their remote employees, or do they just need to do like kind of some a la carte security architecture pieces? Like, what's the best approach?
I'll take it first. If you look at Secure Access Service Edge, it's a full security stack. What you decide to implement is up to your maturity level. So when we talk about remote browser isolation, that's part of the SASE stack. When you talk about secure web gateways, enforcing category-based enforcement, that's part of the SASE stack. When you talk about web reputation and blocking suspicious websites, that's part of the SASE stack. Content disarm and reconstruction, that's part of the SASE stack. The list goes on. Secure remote access, ETNA, part of the SASE. You get all of this already with SASE. What you decide as part of your mitigation techniques and risk mitigation for your company, that's where you just start picking these up. Every couple of years, pick off another one. It's already included in the SASE stack. So to me, it's how much can you digest? How much can your lean IT digest at one time? You may roll out that way. Kory's probably a much more like on the ground, boots on the ground type for this answer, but for me, it's like it's already there. So just what can you consume?
I agree. The functionality is there, and it's really it matters on how much you can implement, right? The functionality is there. Really, what I implement is based on business requirements and use cases. So I take the use cases, what the business requirements are, and then we'll implement those changes as necessary. Now, I'm working with Daniel to try to implement bleeding edge or the cutting edge technology and get to the forefront so that I can have the most up-to-date, technology available at my fingertips. But even then, sometimes I'm not as quick as Daniel is to release new technology to me.
So speaking of kind of being on the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, just the edge in general, What are some things that enterprises need to be thinking of next when it comes to remote work? What should be kind of top of mind for them? Because this is obviously not a trend that's going away. So how can they stay ahead of potential threats now and in the future?
Do something. Doing nothing is getting you nowhere. We know the technology exists. The technology exists. Like from a SASE, that's the architecture. It's going to be the architecture for IoT and OT. Like we haven't seen that migration yet. But as all the workforce went remote and all the lights went off in the office, what about the IoT OT? They're also wanting to work from home. Those devices are already in these lights out locations. That's all moving to these new technologies as well. It's clear, right? The solution exists. The rollout is starting to get phased in over time. So you see, it's there. So it's like work with your vendor that you're already committed with. It's not a multi-vendor solution, right? A lot of this is about a unified structure, a unified vendor, one person to go help you out through this. So basically reach out to that person, reach out to your preferred vendor and get something moving.
And I would echo what Daniel said is don't hesitate, just move forward with an option, right? There are many solutions out there, and take a look at some of your biggest gaps and some of the needs and requirements of your organization and just take a step forward into that security step. So there's always going to be new technologies coming out there. Stay abreast of those new technologies if you can, but always be willing to take a step forward and implement new strategies and ways of securing your organization. You're never going to get to the point where you're fully secure. You're never going to have, well, I've implemented XYZ, now I'm done, I can sit back. Everything is evolving. There are new threats every day, and the security landscape changes. And it's important to just continually evolve with the technology. And like Daniel said, you're gonna get the best benefit by working with your vendor, because your vendor is going to be able to tell you what new things are coming out, what new releases are coming out from your technology stack that you've chosen.
Yeah, especially because as an enterprise business, you've got so much going on. It's kind of hard to always stay abreast of that research. So having that valued partner is important. Absolutely. Well, Daniel, Kory, thank you so much for joining us today to chat about the state of remote work. I appreciate that, Daniel, you're joining us from what looks like the side of the ocean, or very close. So that's very on brand for this particular episode. And as someone who's personally categorized as a remote worker, I will say this was worth coming to the office for. So thanks for having this day with us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Mauricio, very early on when we started this podcast, we established that we wanted this to be a platform where we talk about, thought leadership, but also trends in the industry. And one thing I appreciate is we have been hearing a lot about the Secure Access Service Edge, SASE, throughout many of our episodes. And today in particular, it was good to hear more of that from Daniel and Kory and how that protects networks and protects enterprises. And a lot of what they said echoed the conversation that we had with Bruce and Ted a while back when we were talking about SASE and other security measures to combat threats. And I'm hoping that our listeners are understanding the importance of something like SASE when it comes to protecting their network, regardless of where their employees are and regardless of where their IT teams are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, right, the move to remote or hybrid work has definitely made tools like SASE more important in your IT stack because, it is, going back to that conversation with Ted and Bruce, it is less about, that old school castle mentality where I have an office or I have locations, I fortify those locations and I'm secure. I believe that everybody I let in is a good guy and everybody on the outside is a bad guy. And that's just not the case anymore. We're not we don't have a castle anymore. Companies, whether it's, and to some degree, companies have been struggling with this even pre-pandemic, right? You had remote sales forces or remote offices or, different types of employees that were already road warriors. And so it was one of those kind of, Kory mentioned it, right? Or maybe Daniel mentioned it. It used to be one of those niche use cases where it's like my focus was fortifying my castle and then I'll figure out how to handle those few remote employees later. And then the switch happened overnight where it was like, well, no longer fortifying the castle is the priority. Now I need to figure out how to fortify my employees where they're at and how to fortify them differently. Because, while some people, took to remote work to me, or took remote work to be literal work from home. I can only work from home or the office. And so, they were primarily, sending out routers was acceptable, right? It's like, here, put this in your home office, only connect your corporate equipment to this router, do not connect it to your home network, and we're good to go. And that was just taking the castle mentality, and to continue my analogy, turning it into little fiefdoms, right? Whereas people like Daniel fully embraced the idea of work from anywhere, right? I can work from, like he mentioned, working from a resort. Now, I have never, had the
never
audacity to, go to Cancun or Jamaica or, someplace, Aspen or whatever your adventure looks like, and work from there. But I have known people, both within Ericsson and outside of Ericsson, who, really embrace that. And, one of the people that I used to work with really just, kind of sold his home and bought a giant fifth wheel, and him and his wife spent time just, traveling the country and seeing the US, and still being able to work effectively from wherever they happened to be at that time. Yeah. And so, the pandemic has really, opened people's eyes to the ability of work being a thing you do and not a place you go. But that has created those security challenges and has created that shift in IT mentality overnight. And so, just not from a technology implementation standpoint being difficult, but just from a new learning standpoint, right? Teach old dog new tricks kind of thing. People have made careers over that castle, secure that castle mentality. And so it's really a challenge for them to have to shift that mindset and shift that way of thinking of going from that castle mentality to, enabling work, not just from anywhere, but on anything. Because while I am issued a corporate laptop, and I'm fine working off that laptop, I know other people who prefer to work off something like an iPad, especially if they spend a lot of time on the road and in airplanes. Laptops are super light and 1 or 2 pounds, but even, when you're carrying a backpack and living out of a suitcase, that's a lot of weight to have to haul around everywhere. So they prefer a smaller device. Other devices start to creep into there, right? As ancient as I am, as Taylor likes to say, I do embrace
One time I said it.
I do like to embrace other things. Like, I've migrated away from a paper and pencil tablet, and I use an electronic e-reader to take notes so that I can capture those notes and convert them to text and do those things. And so how do we secure those type of devices when they're on the network, working from your phone, working from an iPad? And in the future, they're kind of niche now, but, augmented reality or virtual reality, or I even saw on a tech YouTube video, glasses that are able to kind of, not the necessarily virtual or augmented reality, but they project a screen so that you could have, those of us that fly economy and are of the larger persuasion, that table, the fold down table is not exactly comfortable. So is there a way that I can use my computer in such a way where I can project this, wear a pair of glasses that project the screen and use a keyboard? How do I secure something like that, where I'm using a couple of different devices aggregated together to make me work more effective? So having to think about those things and explore the new technologies on how to explore all those different devices and ensure that technology is scalable for whatever else may come is definitely that mindset that IT professionals and security professionals need to start getting into if they aren't already there.
And the good news for them is that a lot of these security solutions are, while they're more complex internally, they are also becoming more simple to manage and simple to administer. And that's good news as these networks keep expanding. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed our chat with today's industry experts, we invite you to rate and subscribe to What's Your Signal wherever you listen to podcasts.